Appreciate it. All right. Good morning. How are you? So I'm a mission guy. So usually I need a translator. I'm also going to test to see how awake you are and how engaged. This will be a conversation. Tim, I appreciate this opportunity. I didn't realize I was the final. I feel like an Olympic gold medal winner, or so grateful to be with you. We'll have some conversation for a little bit because I'm curious about your interest in this. Now, I did lose my clicker somewhere along the way, so I'm going to have to be my manual clicker for my PowerPoint. But we're not going to be bound to that. We're just going to have some fun and conversation. You need to know, so my father-in-law, well, he's 96 now. I've got to update that. He's 96. We moved on the farm because he's so hyperactive. And I was on the road a lot. My wife was trying to keep up our place in Martinez. You know, that's how we say it over there. It's not Martinez, it's Martinez. And help her daddy with the 13-acre farm. So we moved out there just to keep an eye on him. So he was cutting grass yesterday when the latest deluge hit. So know that I'm a goat farmer. I'm not fit enough to be with sheep, but that's about me. It's not about you. Have been serving churches for a long time and very active with UMCOR. If you want to talk this tropical system, Debbie, have you seen that? Not good news. I've been in touch with UMCOR and my counterpart in Florida and my counterpart in South Georgia. I'm originally like 7th or 8th generation from the Savannah area. So when they start talking about a stall and meandering and historic flooding, it's bad news for that region because we've overbuilt in Savannah, we've overbuilt on the marshes and the coast, and we don't need Debbie meandering. But we'll talk more about that if you're curious. Had one person say something about solar trailer. I can talk about solar trailer. I was at Zebulon Church yesterday. If you've seen the news about that fire, they had a lightning strike, and that old pine lumber, within an hour and a half, that sanctuary was practically gone. But a beautiful thing is 4 different churches gathered together and had almost 50 people with a work day yesterday at Zebulon to clean out their fellowship hall. So that's a preview and also sets you up for how hyper this next few minutes may be. But we'll want to be in conversation with you about your curiosity. I'm not sure about your experience with UMCOR. How many people do you imagine actually work for UMCOR? Do you think it's... Because once upon a time, I thought it was like an army, like the UMCOR army that would roll in after a disaster. So do you think there's 100 people with UMCOR or volunteers, right? 50? Oh, there's no reason for me to be here. Y'all already know. No, that's good. No, that's good. There are only like maybe 10 paid staff for all of international and domestic U.S. UMCOR. Otherwise, it's volunteers. It's a church centric, a congregation centric army. It's a way of being networked for a congregation to be ready for a disaster in your area. So does that make sense? Like it's church volunteers, just like you rally when there's a need. You know, Pastor Tim says, oh, y'all, we've got to get after this. And you create some leaders and some committees and some structure and you get the job done. That's what this UMCOR approach is in terms of disasters. And the disaster could be a flood, it could be a lightning strike fire, it could be a tornado. Have y'all seen how we're getting those things now, like we're the Midwest or something? or it could be a hurricane or a flooding event. So that's why this is sort of posed as disaster-ready church. It's a way for us to be part of this incredible network so that none of us are alone, that no church is alone. So when Zebulon had the fire, it was our prayers and our giving and our serving all together in a coordinated way that helps things to happen. Now, is this... I saw the word hope somewhere. Has this series been about hope?
What gives you hope? So, right. So, dealing with disasters, with really kind of overwhelming destruction in the midst of all of that, what gives you hope?
Yeah. And the hope for me in some ways is this sort of, none of us are in this mess alone. None of us are in a disaster alone, but it's the ways we help each other. Scripture, I mean, there's so many scriptures about this. I often think about that Good Samaritan story, and you can think of that as an individual, or you can, if you can take a little leap and think beyond an individual to think of a church or a community as the one beaten up and in the ditch and needing help. So this disaster response ministry is a way for a local congregation to be the body of Christ at just that point of the community need, of an individual need or a family need, so that we offer hope and healing, and we help. In some ways, God uses us to redeem one of the very worst days in somebody's life. So that's my quick overview, since you already know the answer to the thing is that it's volunteer-based. Recovery Ministries is a way of us allowing God to use us as a messenger of hope, as a missionary of hope, as somebody in really practical ways to share some hope at that lowest point that someone has. If you follow, Global Ministries in UMCOR now, the international office is in Atlanta. Everybody know that? Yes, moved from New York to Atlanta. So when I came on conference staff in 2014, it was actually a shared role between North Georgia Conference and Global Ministries. And so since 2014, they've been here. Now, again, pandemic has come up twice this morning, but pandemic threw things a different direction in terms of how often we get together in person. But because of technology and communications and capability, we're still a very networked sort of system to share the hope of God with all sorts of people. I listed some of just a few of the disasters. You can follow this more closely on the Global Ministries website or UMCOR. And then some of the things more specific to Georgia, the Southeast, we'll post on the North Georgia website. But one of the reasons 100% of your giving can go to the disaster is because we're volunteers. We've got really slim overhead with just those 10 salaried workers. And most everything else happens at the conference level. So sometimes in disaster circles, we talk about every disaster being local. And how do we empower the locals to assist with their disaster? And that includes the local church. So that happens best at a more localized level. And conferences then are better in position to help some of that to flow really well. But that's why when you give even $1, like if you look at the charity ratings, hey, we're at the highest level on the charity ratings all the time because we've got so little overhead, and that's absorbed in the denominational structure with funding. Ooh, y'all, I don't even want to look at that. Debbie, is an example of how we're a networked system, as we're already in touch with South Georgia Conference. and two, because of our work as UMCOR and United Methodist congregations working together, Georgia EMA is always in touch with us fast. The government can only do so much. I mean, the government does what the government does, right? So that's a small piece of things. It's the church groups, the faith groups, the nonprofits that are often a key to short-term relief and long-term recovery. So do y'all get that trajectory? And in terms of community disaster response, we'll help early on. So like the chainsaw people, the muck out people, the tarp people, we'll coordinate, we'll roll them in there early on if they're needed. And then long-term, we're part of the rebuild. And the rebuild usually is for the most vulnerable folks in the community. The elderly, the handicapped, the poor souls that got the cancer diagnosis 2 or 3 months before the disaster, and their life's a mess, and their funding's a mess, and everything's a mess. And then this sort of thing hits. And so our recovery is then where we're sharing the hope of God in real practical ways by helping people rebuild. So like if you imagine the most vulnerable people in your community, if a tornado hits, a lot of time is elderly folks who let their insurance lapse because they couldn't afford it anymore. And if your insurance is probably going up and up and up and up over the years, it's even worse with vulnerable folks in vulnerable locations on the coast, along rivers, in some sections of towns now where there are these. Have you seen these incredible downbursts where, like, one section of town may have only had an inch or inch and a half of rain, but then there's this weird little pocket that had 6 inches of rain. And a lot of times the infrastructure can't handle that, and it floods a small neighborhood. We had this happen in South Augusta about 6 months ago where a little neighborhood was hit hard, and it was 3/4 of them were renters. And then 1/4 of the population, it was elderly folks who had lived in that community for 40 or 50 years, home paid off, but they didn't have enough funding month to month, year to year, and they had never had a need for insurance and had to rely on others. So that's the nature of some of the work. Yo, and if I get distracted with my phone at times, just know it could be Jima or someone else with stuff going on. So a lot, if you know anything about disaster response, you know a lot of it is, did I tell you I would be the trouble guy? I told you I would be the trouble guy. Oh. Now, you haven't heard anything the last 10 minutes. But I have enough hearing loss and sight loss that, I was fine. So I hope you were fine. So are y'all halfway tracking, or is everybody lost so far? But bottom line, we're a volunteer church movement. GEMA loves us and relies on us, and our neighbors love us and rely on us. I mean, that's the bottom line of some of this. And beyond that, we can get into details or stories or however you want to talk. Some churches love to talk about. So in disasters, there are emergency management. There are a few different pieces. There's a preparation and a training component. There are logistics components, like with warehouse and with cleaning buckets. If you've ever made, we've called them different things over the years. We used to call them flood buckets, and then cleaning kits. Sometimes now we'll call them a hurricane bucket or tornado bucket. It's one of those things that we can, if there's flooding on the coast, we can send a truckload of 500 or 1,000 of those to a location. So those cool church events that you enjoy have really strong impact early on in a response effort. I do have, we call them ERT, these early response teams that often do chainsaw work or muck out or tarping. Sometimes, well, like with these tornadoes, I mean, it's the big trees that are down. And who's got money to pay for all that? And there are unscrupulous groups, it happens every time, that are like vultures who move in on the scene as soon as they see the news, who take advantage of people in that emotional moment where you want to get stuff done. So our volunteer teams roll in and we assist. UMCOR is the great partner with the training and the networking and the grants. So again, a connectional piece of this is this funding. Sometimes we're in a great position and you can send money away and you don't need it. There are other times that you need to receive funding. And that's where UMCOR is a great help to us. Because then the long-term recovery piece takes, well, have you ever done a rebuild or any renovation or any work that you relied on a contractor? That gets really complicated if a whole community has been hit by a disaster. Solar trailer. So sometimes we get, because of what we do, we get partners that seek us out. And that's what happened with this solar trailer. It's really like when I first heard solar trailer, y'all, I'm just a farm boy from South Georgia.
Okay.
Did I mention I'm a goat farmer? I grow okra. It has been the best summer for okra because it rains all the time. The okra's growing 3 inches a day. We had never considered this sort of opportunity. It's a mobile power grid. So like if your home is about 2,800 square feet, if it's sunny day, we can set out our array of solar panels and we could take care of your 2,800 square foot home indefinitely. It's also got 4 battery packs on there. Even if we had 3 days of rain and cloud and no sun whatsoever, the 4 battery packs could take care of your home, a 2,800 square foot home, for 3 days. It's an incredible asset that now we've used in a variety of responses as we help ERT, as we help local situations, because you know how it happens. If a hurricane comes into southwest Georgia and power is knocked out over 5 or 6 or 7 counties, a big area, they'll get the main systems online first, and the further removed you are from civilization, it takes longer to get you power. Or the further removed from civilization your rural county might be, the longer it takes to get you on power. So if we have early response teams or emergency teams in, we could set up a fellowship hall and have it in power, even if it took 6 weeks to get the main power online. So it's an incredible asset, a thing we've used with Zebulon. Oh, it was July 21st. Was that a Sunday? I'm losing track of the days. You know, that little Zebulon church had a parking lot worship service where the church and the community came together to grieve and to, while they were staring at the burnt out sanctuary, you could still smell that burnt after effect, even though it had been raining. And and I'm not sure what happened. And this rig allowed us to have that sort of somewhat somber service, but that service where you grieve, but you try to lean in with some hope to what's next, to do that quietly. You know how a generator sounds? Where you can't hear anything because the generator, and you've got to have certain proximity of the generator to anything you need to power by sound. We had that unit there, and it was quiet and peaceful, and it set just the right stage for what that church needed and that community needed for worship. So it's amazing how sometimes people can share hope, and sometimes resources and tools can be a means of sharing hope. Well, I'm always recruiting volunteers. If any of you want to represent your church, talk with your pastor and talk with me, because here's the thing, y'all. If there's a tornado in your county, in any proximity to you, when the Noonan tornado hit, GEMA contacted me at 5 till 6 in the morning, that morning after, because they wanted to know if we had any folks seasoned and in our network. And I had a guy right there at Cornerstone Church, Bill Pound out of Cornerstone, you can see. Hooked Bill right in, and now he, Bill is an ERT trainer and an ERT leader, so he had a lot of good experience, and he's been a key to us through all of that response. So if you have a tornado in your vicinity, I want to help you be right in the mix of serving your community when your community needs you. And they may not come out and ask you. It may be through the other circles, through the EMA director or Red Cross or GEMA, or through my group, that we get you in just the right position to be a help to your community. So I'm always looking for volunteers, and if one of you, wants to be useful, helpful, connectional, take another step of faith to represent your church, talk with your pastor, and we can help you be part of the network. And again, the beauty of this is it's not all on you. We've got lots of people with lots of experience. We just need a connector point, that connector person with your congregation. So this is some of the idea of the range of partnerships, and this is just a few. Some of them were on that solar trailer side. And really, it's just a way for us to all connect and be really useful when things go bad. Hey, so what y'all want to talk about?
I was wondering, for your recovery, you guys team with Habitat for Humanity?
That's a good question and an interesting question, because it looks different in every county. A lot of this is based on the partnerships available in a community. So we, meaning North Georgia Conference and UMCOR, are really the main organization that stepped up to do recovery for the January 2023 tornadoes and the March 2023 West Point tornado. We're the main group. So the way this looks in Griffin and Spalding County, there is every county is supposed to have a long-term recovery group. Have you ever seen in the church or any organization where there are some names on a piece of paper, but it's not functional and it's not active and it's never going to be? So a lot of the counties don't have a functional long-term recovery group. In Spalding County, there was a group, because if you've been around a day or two, if you remember, like 2011, there was a tornado around Sunnyside, just nearby in Griffin. Spalding County had a recovery group. In that group, the Evangelical Lutherans, do y'all know the ELCA? You have any good Lutheran friends? They are super partners. And so they're great partners with us. Catholic Charities has been a great funding partner for the Griffin work. There's a variety of faith groups and nonprofits there, including Habitat for Humanity, but it's a small group. They don't have any staff really. It's just a few folks who've been at rebuilds for a few years. Now in West Point, there was no long-term recovery group. So it really, do you know Callaway Gardens and the Callaway Foundation? Don't know if you know that foundation. They fund a lot of efforts in Troup County. So really the key to the recovery over there has been the United Methodist with an UMCOR disaster case manager, Habitat for Humanity as the workforce, the project leaders, and then Callaway Foundation that was the funding agent as we reworked homes. Because the West Point tornado didn't get the FEMA declaration. I don't know how much y'all follow the FEMA stuff, but there are more disasters. There's not enough funding. And so you have to have such a high number of disasters, of homes impacted, of people in need, to even get a FEMA declaration. So a lot of these things now don't meet the basic requirement of getting FEMA assistance. So that puts more on the local community, the faith partners, the nonprofits, local foundations. So yeah, every county looks a little different. Like I asked Red Cross, they're great partners with us because we're one of the few groups that go from early response and relief phase all the way through recovery. Not many do that. Most will focus on one piece. Team Rubicon, they focus on one piece. Samaritan's Purse, and they're just about chainsaws and moving stuff. The Baptists, same way. They focus on chainsaws and feeding ministries. So we're partners with all these different groups. Salvation Army, feed. Y'all, they can feed the masses. And Red Cross does the sheltering. But they're quickly out of the picture. I mean, usually within days, those folks, they'll help in the earliest days, and then they roll back out of town. And so that's where it shifts to the locals having to take care of stuff. And that's where a lot of communities get overwhelmed, or they just say, like in Troup County, well, we got the debris off the road and things are back to normal, and they won't even get into the recovery stuff. And so again, that's where the church, like y'all, when I heard all this, I'm thinking, we're talking about old folks and handicapped folks and folks who own a home, but they don't have insurance or they can't rebuild. The church has got to step up and be the church at that point and take care of some things. So yeah, the partnership thing, that's where it's so important. A lot of times in disaster circles, we talk about having to be involved in blue sky days, to know each other, to talk, to strategize, and then that way we're ready when things go sideways. What else y'all want to know or talk about? Look at that. It's like you had my slide deck and you already knew I was headed toward the whole partnership array. Sir.
Well, I'm going to make an assumption here, and that is that there's at least three components to the assets that you bring. There's volunteers, and then there's pre-purchased things like cleaning buckets, and then there's cash. And it seems to me that to be effective, those things have to be in a kind of a balance. How's your balance?
Well, that's like me rolling into most congregations saying, how are those things in good shape? We were talking before, about some of these challenges about having that balance between those things. We're in pretty good shape. Now, I'll be really honest, a lot of the more conservative churches were the boots on the ground, the churches that have left us. And they were also, the way it works, if you get involved, you get the heart for it, and you also spend your money for it. So none of our work is funded by the conference. We're all second or third mile giving from the generosity of congregations and individuals. So we're in good shape, I think, but the test is always, if Debbie does hit us, how many ERT can I get on the ground? Will there be a replenishing of the funding that we'll spend out of pocket quickly? Usually there's a replenishing of all that, of money and volunteers. The hard assets we've got in place. I've got 1,000 buckets ready for Savannah and the coast if those need to roll. And we can, again, I may put the call out for volunteers, but we can load up a truck quickly and have those on the road. So I think we're in good shape, but we'll know when the disaster hits. Yes, ma'am.
I understand. I mean, I know if you're doing something internationally and there is a situation that happens, it's not like you just drive down the road and there's your Home Depot to help you out.
Right.
How quick can you turn when you get the call that you've got to go to Kenya to do something? I mean, how does it all?
Yeah.
That's kind of, I can't fathom it, so that's my.
Oh, that's a super question because our focus is all domestic. It's all on the U.S. in terms of deployment because it's focused on the annual conferences and congregations. The international is a somewhat different approach because they work in some areas where there's an annual conference, but quite often it's just other global partners, humanitarian relief partners, nonprofit groups that are in those areas. Because you're right, by the time we spent all the money and time and resources to get to Kenya, it would not be anything like we expected, and we wouldn't be able to get anything. Plus, we wouldn't have the contacts, it's very complicated. Now, we can send an UMVIM team. Any UMVIM volunteer and mission folks? So UMVIM is quite often the long-term project folks. So like if there was a church in a conference in another part of the world and we were going to help rebuild the church, that's a longer process that could be coordinated, but we would want the U.S. mission team to be well coordinated with the locals. And probably the reality is probably mostly our funding that they need. They would have the skills and we might just join alongside them, to bring our funding and to be there and to assist as needed and maybe see what some next steps are. So yeah, the international is a lot more complex. It's complex in Georgia, y'all, but I can't fathom, the international scene. But yeah, that's where you lean on the locals to know what's needed to do. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a baseline that allows the town or does that get the FEMA designation? Or is it different all the time?
That's
500 houses?
That's well above my pay grade. And that's one of those government things that,
We'll never know.
well, I think it's, I think they would use the word formula. There is going to be some kind of formula, but then based on available funding at the moment, and I think we're in a little lapse of funding right now for the next few weeks. It pushes it down the road. So that's another interesting piece in terms of government response versus church and nonprofit. Sometimes government's working that long timeline. They may have access to more funding, but it could be a real long timeline. Church and nonprofit groups, man, we can get after things a lot faster. Sometimes then the only lag may be with the insurance agent and figuring out some of that. But it could mean months instead of year or years with government. But yeah, if you watch, so if this Debbie hits the coast too bad, have you seen the news about insurance issues down there in the last few years? People can't get coverage or is so skyrocket prices, they can't afford it. So things are going to go from bad to worse, I think, down there with some of that. This you can't see, man. We're networked, we're organized, and some of this I can share you a simple few slides if it helps you later. There are different phases of disasters, so sometimes even people in our network, they'll claim like a niche. It could be because of their past background and experience, professional experience, or because of their interest and availability. The good thing, so like sometimes with disaster response, it's kind of like college ministry. Like you got 4 years, maybe 5 years, well, maybe 6 years with campus ministry. Same thing with this. Quite often, our folks are retirees, and they want to travel, and they want to see the grandkids, so folks can fit this into their schedule as they're available. So they'll be part of our network with ERT, but I've got one of the leaders, Mark Brown out of Northside Church. He's out west now doing the great RV camp out of every Oregon location you can go to with the grandkids. And so he's a trainer for us. He's a great team leader, but he'll also say, thanks, Scott, for the opportunity, but I'm away for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and when I come back, I'll be available to you. So the relief phase is in some ways what's easy. Hey, this is a home we just finished in West Point. And again, West Point individuals couldn't apply to FEMA. And even if you can apply to FEMA, like I think the January 2023 tornadoes, they could apply. And so like FEMA starts out with a top number you can ask for. It's $42,000. But that's just for the safety and security of your home. Like some essential, we're just going to solid this structure up sort of stuff. And so they start chipping away at that number. Even if you do all the paperwork, send in all your information, you have it spot on correct, which people seldom do, and then they'll reject it, and you have to keep after and advocate and adjust, and it goes on and on. But they also chip away at that number. So you may only come in at $10,000 that you get from FEMA. And insurance maybe got you $80,000, and they'll be quibbling back and forth on that number too if they go that high, and that's still not enough to repair your home. So sometimes folks are just underinsured, and we go in and we help make things happen. Hey, what else do you want to talk about? How did I start all the way over? Magic. I think we just got a few moments. I don't know. Yes.
Yeah. So we don't have a disaster recovery coordinator at Canada. We have some people who've gone for the kind of the relief work.
Yeah.
But just for our collective discernment's sake, because I'd love to believe that somewhere in our church there's somebody with a calling to kind of coordinate this kind of work for us. What are the gifts, what are the skills, what's the kind of passion that it takes for a good local church disaster recovery coordinator?
That's a super question. It's really somebody that can get involved with our network and knows your church and can share the needs and the opportunities. So that sort of liaison. A lot of time now, in the old days, every church felt like they had to have their own individual standalone ERT team. It'd be a bunch of cowboys. We'd have a trailer. We didn't know what those 8 guys were going. It's almost always guys. We didn't know what those 8 guys would go off and do, but then they come back with some stories and photos, and we'd be like, oh, they did some chainsaw work and talked to house. But the approach today looks more like, Mark Brown out of Northside is rallying a team. He's got 60 people on his distribution email list, and he's going to stand up a group of 8 to 10 people to go to Savannah after Debbie hits. And you may have one person that jumps into that effort with that team. It could be your key designated leader, or it could be that your leader just put the word out to everybody and somebody had a little bit of time. Now, on that team of 8 people, we got some chainsaw folks. We've got others who sort of maintain the trailer and keep that in order, because the chainsaw guys, they're just, doing their frenetic thing. A little team of 3 that are just doing the chainsaw work. It could be that somebody has, now this is a Scott wish list. Maybe somebody has a truck and they have a skid steer or a tractor and they load that up, because we're going to work smart. And most of what we do these days is not picking up everything up by hand. Because we're moving bigger material, we have some equipment. So the beauty often, Tim, is that these teams, if we send 8 people, Mark Brown's an old pro, he's going to have somebody that's got a skid steer or a tractor with the group. They're going to have a lot of experience, and you could throw 1 or 2 people in with that team, and it would be glorious, as easy as possible, would be a great experience. But yeah, a lot of the time it's just the main connector from your church, so that if a tornado hits your area, Scott's not pestering you all the time, but I can have that coordinated person that already has the blessing of the church. Yes, sir.
Sorry to repeat here, but you mentioned in answer to my question that a number of your boots on the ground formerly, they've left the conference. They were among the more the conservative churches out of conference. But I'm thinking you partner with a lot of organizations that are not inside the conference. Is it not possible to continue to partner with those people or whatever organization that they have created to replace what we were doing in the conference?
Right. Super question, because that's exactly our strategy. Usually the churches just had one or two people involved with us. When their whole congregation is just the one or two. So Alpharetta Church, often they would get the news story, because the team lead from Alpharetta, they'd have 8 other churches represented on the team, but it would be individuals. So it's not like the whole church. So yes, the UMCOR approach is we partner with almost everybody. For ERT deployment, if folks can follow the lead of the church, of the conference, and follow the process locally, then they're good to go. So that's the test out this next season to see. We think the individuals are still very committed to this kind of ministry. We think. They've proven through the winter and spring they are, and nobody's fussing or fighting or distracting from the mission at hand. And the mission at hand is always serving the most vulnerable people in disaster. The spotlight's on them, it's not on us. So that's some of the common language. As long as we all keep the spotlight on the disaster and those in need, we're good to work together. And mission people, a lot of time we can put up with some of the other stuff. We can just leave that mess at home because we're focused on the mission. But I'm realistic. We'll put that to the test and see. And my hope too is that after we continue to show that we can keep the spotlight on people in need, that the funding, so that's the other little piece, will the funding keep replenishing like it has in the past? So I think we're close to time. Are we close to time? Because you know how it is with any mission, anybody, any disaster, anybody. We can show pictures and ideas all day. Most of what we do is help things move from chaos to something that's more structured. And a lot of time that helps the community in ways that nobody else can do. So the church is well situated for that. And because of UMCOR and your role in praying and giving and buckets and going, it creates a really cool opportunity for us to keep working together and serving. Well, y'all, we could swap stories all day. Oh, look at this. So, these are just examples of the type of mission teams and work teams. If y'all say, well, no, we're not going to muck out houses, it could be with your designated mission or disaster person that you think, hey, we can send a flooring team or a sheetrock team to Griffin. We can still put you to work in Griffin just down the road for a day or a couple of days. You could overnight on air mattresses in the luxurious Griffin First United Methodist Church and enjoy helping some folks in need. But you can see, I don't know if you saw any of those photos of West Point. And again, that was a small-scale disaster that didn't meet FEMA criteria. Maybe like 20 homes, but just obliterated, looked like a hurricane impact. And so that's where the church is the church, and we stand up to help folks in need. And again, that's where I find hope. And I find it with folks who follow Christ and are drawn to some of the toughest situations and give themselves to help. So I hope that your church, Well, I hope, and that's what I'll be praying as I drive back to Augusta, that there'll be somebody or some couple of people that step up and say, yeah, I want to be the liaison for Cannon Church and with UMCOR and the conference. Because, again, if anything hits over here, we'll get to know each other too well. Zebulon, Pastor Ariana yesterday said, well, Scott, I've known you for years, but I didn't think I'd get to know you this way. And that's how it is. I mean, we don't choose the disasters. They kind of choose us in our community. So I hope that you never have to call on me, but if you do, we know each other somewhat, and hopefully we'll take some steps together to at least have a person or two here that knows the language, knows the process, and can be our main point of contact. Yes, ma'am.
There's your chainsaw problem too.
What? Sweet.
What's involved with the training? Like, how intense is that training to be?
So the foundational ERT is sort of like the foundational level, and that's a great question. It's mostly a Saturday in a class with about 20 people, usually represent 10 or a dozen churches. It's typically some of this type stuff with process and language and approach, like the things we do and we don't do. We do a whole lot of work on safety. So like we need safety officers. We do a whole lot of work with communication. We need communication people. But it's the ERT training is that basic entry level. Now, if you wanted to go next step with the chainsaw, we got specialized classes, where we rig you, with all your PPE, your protective equipment, and because it's different. Like the way we do chainsaw, you're dealing with usually material trees that were twisted, and it's not like Scott on the farm with his chainsaw on a Saturday. We're in a team environment working with twisted material. And so even with our guys that love chainsaws, we do a lot of training on safety. But yeah, the basic ERT is sort of the entry level. And we've got trainers all nearby. We've got a trainer at Roswell Church, Mark at Northside. So right in this area, there are a lot of churches that have experience, and we got trainers that could help y'all come on board. And it can be a way to gather some of the other area churches. Tim, I've told Rodrigo a few times over the years, buddy, and this was when he was DS, it's like, yeah, we don't have enough ERT from this part of the district and at that time on to Athens. And so y'all don't often have tornadoes, but look, we had a tornado in Conyers there the 1st of April, so we've got to be prepared. Hey, I think